With their tanks and their bombs and their bombs and their guns in the West, they are providing. On Wednesday, after delays, deliberation and pressure from allies, Germany agreed to send 14 of its Leopard 2 tanks, the most widely used in Europe, to Ukraine, the first time it has sent weapons to a war zone since World War II. And a few hours later, the US announced that it would send 31 M1 Abrams tanks to help the Ukrainian fight against Russia. These powerful tanks may prove to be some of the most vital Western aid since the war began, as these tanks are bigger and stronger than any Russian ones, leveling the playing field on the battlefield. But they are still outnumbered by Russian tanks, who have almost 3,000. Furthermore, the reaction to sending Leopard tanks in Germany has been mixed, with one poll showing that only 46% supported their approval, due to fears of escalation and bad memories from German tanks rolling into Russia in the mid-20th century. But will these weapons actually make a difference? By giving significant military support, is the West effectively declaring war on Russia? And could this lead to a direct escalation in continental Europe? Are we straying further away from the negotiating table? How will Western military aid affect the war?
So let's get to it, gentlemen. How will Western military aid affect the war? As always, we begin with our quickfire round, 30 seconds each to lay out your initial stance on the matter, and we'll pick up the conversation from there. So, Dr. Morozov, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
Okay.
Yeah, so how will Western military aid affect the war?
Look, these 45 tanks that were announced yesterday actually will affect it more symbolically than technically, because Ukraine needs, according to Mr. Podolak, about 300, 400 tanks. But in principle, if it's just the beginning of the new campaign of supplying Ukraine with heavy weapons, with the missiles, it will be good and it will help.
Okay, Mr. Panchenko, your take?
So, in my opinion, what Ukraine seeks here is to make up for the quantity Russia wields with the quality of the weapons we have received. And I agree that, yes, indeed, we still have a way to go with the quantities that we are going to fight with. But again, this is just the beginning. The big win here is that we have broken the taboo that previously existed in relations with the West. No tanks. Now we have tanks. Probably we'll have other weapons too. So this is about the dynamics, about the principal change therein, and about the hope for the increase in the quantities of the weapons.
Last but not least, Kolyohin, your thoughts?
I think it's outrageous that Germany is sending its tanks to almost to the Russian land. It happened twice before, during the First World War and the Second one, and we don't want the history to repeat itself. And the world and Germany should think how to make peace and not how to make war. I think this is the lesson they should learn already, because there is no enough tanks in the world to win this war and to do something in this war. You should talk about peace.
Tanks rarely win wars. And on that note, gentlemen, let's open our discussion, and please feel free to interact. And let's begin from the point that Mr. Kolyohin was just making. Did Germany stalling sabotage the Ukrainian effort, or did Germany caved in wrongfully to the Ukrainian and Western pressure, Mr. Panchenko?
I think that this was, even though this was a big political battle, I think this was a very right move, because if somebody seeks to have peace, he doesn't start a war in the first place. And what the West here and Ukraine are trying to do is basically to curtail the appetites of Russia, because the general idea according to which this war is flowing is that if we don't make Putin stop, he will never stop. It's a naive thing to think that he will stop at Ukraine or at other countries. So I think this is a very right, and we in Ukraine feel this is a very rightful decision, because this is the way to stop the war the quickest.
Dr. Morozov, are you in agreement with Mr. Kolyohin's statement that Berlin might have made a mistake here?
No, I also agree with Maxim. I think that it was the right move, but I want to ask another question.
Please.
The question is actually what can be considered to be the peace in this campaign? Because I don't now understand how can it be reached. Even if Ukraine will press Russian troops out of its territory, will it be peace? The answer is probably no. It will be just a break of the war for some time. So this is why I don't understand exactly how this war now can be finished. But today, the best thing is just to support Ukraine with as many weapons as possible. And yes, I think that Germany, as a part of today United Europe, has to do it.
Mr. Kolyohin, Ukrainian officials are now warning Russia that the war will soon get to Moscow. Is Kyiv becoming a bit overconfident?
I think that Kiev has its game in the mass media, especially in the Western media, and not on the battleground. But actually, maybe it's better because on the ground, it's ridiculous. Nobody can win a superpower that can destroy the world with its nuclear weapons. So it's just nonsense to think that if Ukraine will have more tanks or jets or missiles, the war will end. Maybe some companies, especially American ones, will be richer, and maybe some countries will have more power in Eastern Europe or in other regions of the world. Maybe some people will get more money or influence of that, but it will not end the war for sure, and Ukraine will not be in Moscow. Its troops will not be there. That's also for sure.
Well, we need to speak on how it is being perceived from Moscow's standpoint. Russia obviously viewing it as a blunt provocation. Is the West, to an extent, pushing Russia against the wall here, effectively declaring a war, Dr. Morozov?
Look, the question is, I think that from the very beginning, we have to remember who started the war. This is one thing. The second thing is actually from what the previous speaker said, Ukraine has just to accept the fact that they are smaller and that they are struggling with superpower and to give up. I just don't understand. They are struggling for their national sovereignty. And I think that in such a kind of a struggle, all the weapons that can be reached is unnecessary.
But if I understand Mr. Kolyohin correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, he's claiming that Ukraine and Ukrainian soldiers are being utilized by exterior forces. Maxim Panchenko, are you in agreement with that?
No, I most certainly am not in agreement with that. And let me go on some points that have been raised by the speakers in a couple of minutes before me. First of all, when there is a question of whether there is some progress, some achievement that Ukraine can do on the battlefield, look at what has been happening on the battlefield for the last 6 years. The so-called, the self-proclaimed second biggest and largest and most powerful army in the world did not succeed to take anything from except maybe Soledar a couple of weeks back during an entire 6-month period. And also on the question of the nuclear weapons, there also is a bit of a hypocrisy here when people are saying that, like, what you're doing fighting a nuclear power. Let's look back at the history. The USSR lost the war in Afghanistan, or look at the US. It retrieved from Vietnam, even though it had already been the nuclear power. So these things happen. It is perfectly possible to defeat an aggressor, even if he wields nuclear weapons. So that's it.
But Mr. Panchenko, can you relate to the notion suggesting that providing this amount of weapons is merely pushing the sides further away from the negotiation table, where any type of a lasting solution is to be reached ultimately?
No, I don't agree with that, because let's compare it with a day-to-day situation, well, more or less day-to-day situation, when you have domestic abuse, or in the political realm, if you have terrorists shooting, at schools, for instance, somewhere in the US, for instance. You do not negotiate with them. You do not make concessions to them. So you make some kind of an agreement with them. It has to be victory over them to get them curtailed so that it does not happen again. This is the same logic here. What is there to negotiate with? There is the notion of sovereignty enshrined in the UN documents in the first place. Right. There is the fact that Russia was the one to cross Ukrainian borders back in 2014 in the hybrid sense, and in the most direct sense on 24th of February. So what are we even talking about? Are we trying to make peace with a man who is trying, to get advantage of a woman, of a victim here, and not to punish him, but to say let's speak about
talk
the terms.
It out.
No, he's guilty.
Nicole, maybe not everything or anything can be talked out.
I think that the talk's supposed to be in the West and in Russia is how to achieve a peace agreement. And that's the only thing that we should talk about, because otherwise we see so many people are dying on both sides, but maybe the countries that they are outside of Ukraine and Russia, they don't see it, they don't feel it. And maybe they will feel it one day because of their actions, and then their citizens and residents of Germany, of UK, of US will ask their governments why you did those reckless moves instead of trying to achieve peace when Russia was in negotiation point. Why you didn't try to achieve peace in time?
Dr. Morozov, as we're nearing the end of the first part of our conversation, concluding remarks, are we getting further away from the negotiation table?
Look, I think I am very pessimistic on the negotiations, because I think that today's the position of both countries are so far from each other that there is nothing actually to negotiate on, because actually Russia sees the conquered territories as the part of Russia, and Ukraine will never agree to this. So I don't understand what are to be settled there.
Yes, still a zero-sum game at this point in time. Gentlemen, you're staying with us. We need to take a very short break now, but when we get back, we discuss further the impact, of course, of the fresh Western delivery, and also what's the impact of the anti-corruption cleanup Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, is engaged in. So do not go anywhere. You're staying with us. A few minutes break, and we're back with the summit. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Kolyohin, Maksym Panchenko, and Dr. Boris Morozov. Thank you, gentlemen, so very much for staying with us. We're also, of course, staying on topic. But before we get back to our conversation, let's take a listen to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky saying, "Thank you, but there's more to be done." Let's take a listen.
The key now is speed and volume. The speed of training of our military, the speed of supplying tanks to Ukraine, the volume of tank support. We have to form a tank fist, such as a fist of freedom, after hits of which tyranny will not rise again. We can do it together. I spoke today with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. We have also to open the supply of long-range missiles for Ukraine. It is important that we expand our cooperation in artillery, and we have to reach the supply of aircrafts for Ukraine. And this is a dream. This is a task, an important task for all of us.
Okay, gentlemen, another quick fire round, 30 seconds each. Is it all too much or not enough? Nicole, take the lead, please.
I think that, of course, it's too much because no weapons should be sent to Ukraine. And I have a feeling that the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, is a little bit like a TV star or a movie star in a Hollywood movie that orchestrated by the United States, but maybe he's forgetting that his people are dying every day, innocent citizens in this war, and he's speaking about weapons like it's just some kind of a movie that one day will end and everybody will be alive again, but it's a real life.
Maxim Panchenko.
Responding to the previous speaker, to Mr. Kolyohin, how does it happen so that you say that the U.S. orchestrated this deal and this thing that is happening, but still Russia is the one who crossed the borders, who made, Bucha, Irpin, and everything else? This is a rhetoric answer to your question, to the question in the first place: is the equipment enough? No, it's not enough. We broke the taboo, but we are on the upheaval in terms of quantities, and we need to push it further in order to show the predator its place.
Last but not least, Dr. Boris Morozov, your thoughts?
Look, I think, as I said already, it's not enough, but this is the start. And I want to remind one very good saying. Of course, Afghanistan couldn't win again in the war against Russia, and Vietnam also couldn't. What they could do, they could not lose, and they didn't. Maybe this is also a kind of a way out.
Okay, and on that note, gentlemen, please feel free to interact with one another. Nicole, you've heard Maxim Panchenko. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I think that it's really understandable that Russia crossed the border, but you can think a little bit in a sophisticated way that maybe United States or other countries, they can manipulate Ukraine, especially because it's a bit of a corrupted country, as we know, to do such a moves, because maybe Ukraine wants to be part of the Western world, part of the EU. They want to be close allies of the United States, so maybe they are trying to satisfy their boss, and they will do anything to be part of this beautiful war that we see in Hollywood.
Okay, Mr. Panchenko, please, please respond.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
When we talk about, Ukraine allegedly being a puppet of the West, it is dangerous to forget that we still have to pay attention to the fact that there are 40 million people here living in this country, and it's their genuine opinion, according to all the polls, according to the results of all the elections, to go westbound. Ukraine wants to go to the west. It's just that Russia does not want to accept that fact. Russia wants to have a belt of security, so to say, of loyal states around it, which is why Russia is trying to keep Ukraine under its grip. It's clear as day, except as I said, the opinion and the willingness of Ukrainians, of the 40 million of people living here, is very different. Which is why this is the point, the topic on which, based on which the war began, basically.
And speaking of Russian allies, Belarusian leader Lukashenko is talking about a non-aggression pact. Is it a Kremlin-orchestrated deception move of a sort, or a trial balloon here, Dr. Morozov?
Look, first, I don't agree with the first speaker, because I still think that the positions are quite clear. Ukrainians are struggling for their independence. Ukrainians are struggling for, being the part of Western community, and as an absolutely sovereign country, they can do whatever they want and reach the camp which they want. So if they don't want to be the ally of Russia, I think that it is at least their right. And yes, of course, during all the history of this last 30 years, Russia considered Ukraine to be a part of the Russian Empire, or let's call it the Russian sovereign. And it behaved this way. It just influenced the Ukrainian president, tried to put the people there in charge who were more or less associated with Russian politics, and so on and so forth. So this is how it ended. It ended in the war. And Russia was, all the West tried to speak Russia out of this step, and they didn't manage. Personally, I think that not enough was made to stop the war before it started, because I think that the strong ultimatum from the West, let's say, addressed to Russia, could probably change today's situation, but it never happened.
But we're hearing Zelensky telling Sky News today he's not interested in meeting, and I'm quoting, nobody, Putin, for peace talks. But what's the alternative here, Maxim Panchenko?
The alternative here is, as I already mentioned previously, to push for a victory of Ukraine. That's the only way to curtail the appetites of the aggressor. Because again, you cannot meet an aggressor halfway. Imagine if people back in the day, if governments back in the day wanted to meet Hitler halfway. Everything started with Czechoslovakia, didn't it? That's where they were trying to meet him halfway, but he went farther after it happened. So that's the role model of a situation that we can apply as an analog to what's happening now, which is why the ball on which we're keeping our eyes is the victory, and to that end, the quality and quantity of weapons is crucial.
Kolyohin, Mr. Panchenko saying very clearly there is no middle ground here.
Yeah, I understand, but it's not a game, it's not a chess game or something like that. What will happen? So this war will go forever and people will die forever, Russians, Ukrainian, and soon probably from other countries in Europe or the United States. What will be the end game? We should end this war. Okay, even let's say Russia is wrong and West is right or Ukraine is right. So what are you going to do now? You will send more and more weapons, more and more people, and they will continue to fight, and homes will be destroyed, people will die, and what will happen? How it will end? I don't understand the logic of the West of Ukraine. What will be in the end?
Dr. Morozov, maybe you have the answer?
So basically what you are proposing is just when you are ready to agree to it and just to enjoy. I don't understand the previous speaker. Look, as I said already, Ukrainians are struggling. And also, yes, it is a chess game in a way, because actually it's not only the war game, it's also the game of economy. It's also the war of politics.
Right.
I think that West is not doing enough to help Ukraine to win in this war. This is why I'm rather pessimistic. I can't foresee Ukrainian troops in Moscow, for instance. But I still think that if the Ukraine will reach its own borders, this will be a kind of political signal, and maybe something will change in Russia, in its political structure.
Yes. Maxim Panchenko, in the short time we have left, your concluding remarks in 20 seconds, please.
Yes, I would like to refer to the premise on which Mr. Kolyohin was operating. He said this is going to be a never-ending exercise. He's hinting as if the Russian resources are inexhaustible, but the very reason he's putting this forward is because they are exhaustible, and Russia is already afraid of that. So this is a good, point to keep in mind and a good inspiration to keep pushing for more weapons, because Russia is already a little bit broken down.